The ancient vampire's hand trembled as he clutched his throat, feeling his immortal strength drain away like water through his fingers. And across the room, the enslaved witch who had healed his enemy stood frozen, her eyes wide with the terrible realization that her single act of compassion had somehow severed the unbreakable bond that had kept her captive for 3 centuries. Wait before the next revelation happens. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Lord Casimir Vane had ruled the Northern Territories for 800 years. And in all that time, no creature had ever dared defy the blood bindings he placed upon those who served him. Yet here he was, on his knees in the grand hall of Ravenmore Castle, gasping like a drowning man, while his carefully cultivated power dissipated into nothingness. The witch, Ilara, remained perfectly still near the doorway where she had been tending to the wounded hunter. Her hands were still stained with the man's blood, the very blood she had used her forbidden healing magic to restore. The hunter himself had fled the moment he could stand, disappearing into the storm that raged outside the castle walls. "What have you done?" Casimir's voice was a rasp, unfamiliar even to his own ears. For centuries, his words had carried the weight of absolute authority, compelling obedience from every supernatural creature within his domain. Now they sounded almost mortal. Ilara's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She wore the plain gray dress of a servant, her dark hair bound in a simple braid that fell past her shoulders. 300 years ago, she had been a powerful hedge witch, living peacefully in a village at the edge of the Thornwood Forest. Then Casimir had come, attracted by rumors of her gift for healing, and had claimed her as his property. The blood binding he had placed upon her made defiance impossible. She could no more refuse his commands than she could stop her own heart from beating. Or so they had both believed. "I don't know," she whispered, and it was the truth. "He was dying. You told me to let him die, and I couldn't. The healing magic just came, and then you broke 3 centuries of absolute obedience." Casimir forced himself to stand, though the effort clearly cost him. His normally pale skin had taken on an ashen quality, and his movements lacked their usual predatory grace. He was still beautiful in the way that ancient vampires always were: sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, a mouth that curved with practiced cruelty. But now, for the first time since she had known him, he looked almost vulnerable. The realization sent a shock of fear through her. If the blood binding was broken, if she truly was free, then Casimir had no reason to keep her alive. She had seen him kill for far less than defiance. "My lord," she began, but he raised a hand, silencing her. "Don't." His eyes narrowed as he studied her, as though seeing her for the first time. "How long have you been able to resist?" "I haven't. I swear it. This was the first time I've—" She stopped, her breath catching. "Wait, you can't feel the binding anymore, can you?" Casimir's silence was answer enough. The blood binding was a complex magic, requiring both the vampire's power and the victim's blood. It created a connection that allowed the vampire to sense their servant's location, to compel obedience, to punish disobedience with excruciating pain. Casimir had bound dozens of creatures over the centuries: witches, werewolves, lesser vampires who had challenged his authority. None had ever broken free while he still lived. "The hunter," Casimir said slowly, his analytical mind already working through the problem. "Tell me exactly what happened. Ilara swallowed hard. He came to the castle 3 nights ago, tracking the vampire who killed his family. You captured him, kept him in the dungeons. Tonight, you brought him up here to question him, and when he wouldn't talk, you— She closed her eyes, remembering. You tore open his throat. Not to feed, just to punish him for his silence. Then you told me to watch him bleed out, to understand what happens to those who oppose you. And you chose to save him instead? Casimir's voice was soft, but there was something dangerous in it. Why? Because he didn't deserve to die like that. The words came out before she could stop them, 3 centuries of suppressed defiance suddenly bubbling to the surface. He was hunting a monster who murdered his wife and children. He had every right to seek vengeance, and you tortured him for it like it was a game. Casimir moved faster than she could track, crossing the space between them in an instant. His hand closed around her throat, lifting her off the ground. You forget yourself, witch. Binding or no binding, I can still end you. But his grip wasn't as strong as it should have been. Ilara could feel it, the weakness in his fingers, the slight tremor in his arm. She met his eyes, and for the first time in 300 years, she didn't look away. Then do it, she said quietly. But ask yourself first, what if killing me makes it worse? What if whatever happened when I healed that hunter, what if it happens again when you spill my blood? Casimir's eyes widened slightly. Then, slowly, he lowered her back to the ground and released her throat. You don't know what you've done, he said, and neither do I. But I've survived 8 centuries by understanding power, and this? He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. This is a transference. Somehow, when you used your magic to heal that hunter, you channeled it through our binding. And the binding, instead of punishing you for disobedience, redirected my power to fuel your spell. That's impossible, Ilara breathed. Blood bindings don't work that way. They don't. They shouldn't. Casimir moved to the massive fireplace that dominated one wall of the hall, staring into the flames. Unless the binding was never as complete as I thought. Unless there was always something in you that resisted, something that waited for the right moment to break free. Ilara touched her throat where his hand had been, her mind racing. 300 years ago, when Casimir had performed the binding ritual, she had fought with everything she had. She remembered the taste of her own blood as he forced her to drink the mixture of their mingled essences, remembered the feeling of invisible chains wrapping around her soul. But she also remembered something else, a moment just before the ritual completed, when her own magic had surged up in one final act of rebellion. She had assumed that surge had been crushed, overwhelmed by Casimir's superior power. But what if it hadn't? What if some core of her magic had remained free, hidden so deep that even she hadn't been aware of it? The hunter, Casimir said suddenly, turning back to her. You said he was tracking a vampire who killed his family. Do you know which vampire? No, you didn't let him speak before I silenced him. Yes. Casimir's expression had shifted, his strategic mind clearly working through implications she couldn't yet see. But he must have tracked his quarry here, to my territory, which means one of my court was involved. And if one of my court has been killing indiscriminately enough to attract a hunter's attention, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. There are rules, Ilara. Rules that keep our kind safe from detection, from the kind of attention that leads to purges and stake-wielding mobs. If someone has been breaking those rules under my protection, you need to find the hunter, Ilara realized, before he brings back reinforcements. We need to find the hunter, Casimir corrected. You broke the binding, witch. Whether intentionally or not, you've made yourself a player in this game. And if what I suspect is true, if there's a traitor in my court who's been reckless enough to provoke a hunter and clever enough to hide it from me, then we're both in danger now." Elara shook her head. "I'm not helping you." "Then you're condemning yourself to death." Casimir's voice was matter-of-fact. "Do you think the hunter will spare you because you healed him once? You're a witch in a vampire's castle. If he returns with other hunters, you'll be ash and dust along with the rest of us. Your only chance of survival is to help me root out the traitor and deal with the hunter before this escalates." She wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to take advantage of her unexpected freedom and disappear into the night. But Casimir was right about one thing. She had nowhere to go. The world had changed dramatically in 3 centuries. The village where she had once lived was long gone, along with everyone she had ever known. She had no allies, no resources, nothing but the clothes on her back and her magic. Her magic. For the first time in 300 years, she had used her healing gift freely, without Casimir's permission, and it had felt like coming alive again. "If I help you," she said slowly, "I want something in return." Casimir's eyebrow arched. "You're negotiating with me now? The binding is broken. That makes us something close to equals, doesn't it?" She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I want access to your library, the restricted section where you keep the books on advanced magic." "Absolutely not. Then I walk out that door right now, and you can face whatever's coming alone." Her heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "You said it yourself. Your power is weakened. You need someone you can trust, and like it or not, I'm the only one here who has no reason to betray you to your court." Casimir studied her for a long moment, and she could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Finally, he inclined his head slightly. "Very well. Help me resolve this situation, and you'll have access to the library. But Elara," his voice dropped to a dangerous purr, "if you try to use what you learned there against me, broken binding or not, I will make you regret that you ever learned to read." "Agreed." She extended her hand, a gesture of bargain sealing that felt absurdly human given the circumstances. Casimir looked at her hand for a moment, then clasped it briefly. His skin was cool and dry, and she could feel the tremor of weakness still running through him. "We start tonight," he said. "The hunter has a few hours head start, but he's wounded and on foot in unfamiliar territory. We can track him." "We?" Elara repeated. "You're taking me with you?" "You're the one who healed him. That means your magic is mingled with his blood now. You should be able to sense him, if you try." Casimir moved toward the door, then paused. "Change out of that servant's dress. You'll need something more practical. There's a wardrobe in the east wing, 3rd door on the left. It belonged to—" He stopped himself. "It belonged to someone who no longer needs it. The clothes should fit you." He left without another word, leaving Elara alone in the great hall. She stood there for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. Then she looked down at her hands, still stained with the hunter's blood, and felt a smile tugging at her lips. For 300 years she had been a slave, a tool to be used at her master's whim. But in a single moment of compassion, everything had changed. She still didn't understand how or why, but the blood binding that had kept her captive was broken, and now, instead of being Casimir's property, she was his ally. It wasn't freedom, not exactly, but it was a start. The wardrobe Casimir had mentioned was in a room that had clearly once been a woman's chamber. The furniture was elegant but dusty, the bed neatly made with linens that no one had disturbed in years. Elara tried not to think too hard about who had owned this room, what had happened to her. The clothes were indeed practical: leather riding pants, a warm wool tunic, a cloak lined with fur. all of them in shades of deep green and brown, colors that would blend into the forest. Ilara changed quickly, braiding her hair more tightly and securing it with a leather cord she found in a drawer. When she caught sight of herself in the tarnished mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. She looked like someone who might choose her own path, rather than someone who followed orders. She found Casimir in the courtyard, already mounted on a massive black horse. A second horse, a bay mare with intelligent eyes, stood waiting beside him. "You ride?" Casimir asked. "I used to. It had been 3 centuries, but some skills came back quickly." She mounted the mare with only slight awkwardness, settling into the saddle and taking up the reins. Casimir nodded approvingly, then urged his horse toward the gate. The storm had lessened to a steady rain, and the moon was trying to break through the clouds. As they rode out into the night, Ilara felt a strange sense of possibility opening up before her. "Tell me about your court," she said as they entered the forest path. "Who would be reckless enough to risk your wrath?" "That," Casimir said grimly, "that is the question I've been asking myself. I have 12 vampires who live here permanently, sworn to my service in exchange for protection and hunting rights. Most of them are old enough to know better than to draw attention. But there are always young ones, newly turned, who think they're invincible." He paused. "And then there's Kristoff." "Who's Kristoff?" "My lieutenant. He's been with me for nearly 400 years, longer than anyone else in the court. He's powerful, cunning, and utterly loyal." Casimir's tone suggested he was trying to convince himself, or at least he always has been. "But you suspect him?" "I suspect everyone." Casimir glanced at her. "That's how you survive as long as I have. Trust is a luxury I can't afford." Ilara thought about that as they rode deeper into the forest. The trees here were ancient, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. She let her awareness expand, reaching out with her magic the way Casimir had suggested, searching for any trace of the hunter she had healed. At first, there was nothing. Then, so faint she almost missed it, she felt a pull, like a thread connecting her to something distant. She urged her horse in that direction, and Casimir followed without question. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, following the invisible thread through the winding forest paths. Finally, Ilara held up a hand, stopping. "He's close," she whispered, "just ahead." Casimir dismounted and moved forward on foot, gesturing for her to stay with the horses. But Ilara ignored him, tying the reins to a low branch and following. If she was going to be part of this, she needed to see it through. They found the hunter huddled in a small cave, barely more than a depression in the rocky hillside. He had managed to start a small fire, and he was sitting with his back against the stone, his hand pressed against his throat where Casimir had torn it open. The wound had healed completely, leaving only smooth skin and dried blood. He looked up as they approached, and his hand immediately went to the knife at his belt. "Stay back," he warned, his voice hoarse. "Peace," Ilara said quickly, stepping forward before Casimir could speak. "I'm not here to hurt you. You're with him." The hunter's eyes flicked to Casimir, and the hatred there was palpable. "Which makes you my enemy." "She saved your life," Casimir said coldly, "at great cost to herself. You could show some gratitude." "Gratitude?" The hunter laughed bitterly. "For what? For giving me a few more hours before you hunt me down and finish what you started?" "We're not here to kill you," Ilara said. She crouched down, making herself less threatening. "We're here because we need information. The vampire you're hunting, the one who killed your family, we need you to identify him." The hunter's expression shifted from hostility to suspicion. "Why would you care?" "Because if one of my court has been killing indiscriminately, he's putting all of us at risk," Casimir said. "Hunters are a nuisance, but manageable. Hunters who band together, who bring in the church or the military, that becomes an existential threat. So yes, I care very much about finding whoever was stupid enough to murder your family. His name, the hunter said slowly, is Christoph Valentine. He came to my village 2 months ago, charming and wealthy. He courted my sister, won her trust. Then, one night, his voice broke. One night he revealed what he really was. He killed my sister, my wife, my children. He left me alive deliberately, told me to spread the word about what happens to those who welcome strangers. Ilara saw Casimir's face go very still. "Christoph?" he said softly. "You're certain?" "I'll never forget his face, never forget his voice as he laughed while my family died." The hunter's hand tightened on his knife. "So if you're protecting him, I'm not protecting him." Casimir's voice was ice. "If what you say is true, then he's violated every law we have. He's made himself a target, and by extension, made my entire court vulnerable." He turned to Ilara. "We need to get back to the castle, now." "Wait." Ilara looked between them. "What about him?" She gestured to the hunter. "What about him?" Casimir started back toward the horses. "We can't just leave him here." "Watch me." Ilara caught up to him, grabbing his arm. It was a bold move, touching him without permission, but desperation made her brave. If Christoph really did what he says, then this man deserves justice, and we might need his testimony if we're going to convince your court that Christoph needs to be punished. Casimir looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. For a moment, she thought he might strike her. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Fine, but he rides with us, and if he tries anything, I won't hesitate to snap his neck." The hunter, who eventually gave his name as Thomas, proved to be a silent but cooperative presence on the ride back to the castle. He rode behind Ilara on the bay mare, his body tense with distrust, but his hands empty of weapons. Casimir had taken his knives, though Ilara suspected the hunter had more hidden somewhere. As they approached Ravenmoor Castle, dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Casimir pulled his cloak hood up, shielding his face from the growing light. "We'll enter through the servants' entrance," he said. "I don't want anyone knowing we're back until I've had a chance to assess the situation." But as they rounded the final bend in the path, they saw that something was wrong. The main gate stood open, and smoke was rising from one of the towers. Casimir urged his horse into a gallop, and Ilara followed, her heart pounding. The courtyard was chaos. Servants ran back and forth with buckets of water, trying to contain a fire in the eastern wing. And standing in the center of it all, directing the efforts with calm efficiency, was a tall vampire with silver hair and cold blue eyes. Christoph! He looked up as they entered, and a smile curved his lips. "Casimir, how fortunate! We've had a bit of an incident, as you can see." "A servant got careless with a candle in the library. Such a tragedy. So many irreplaceable books lost." Ilara felt her blood run cold. The library, the restricted section where Casimir kept his most valuable texts on magic and binding, the very books she had negotiated access to. Casimir dismounted slowly, his expression unreadable. "How convenient," he said softly, "that this accident should happen the very night I'm away from the castle." Christoph's smile never wavered. "Isn't it? But I'm sure it's just coincidence. After all, who would dare deliberately destroy your property?" His eyes flicked to Thomas, still sitting on the horse behind Ilara. "And I see you've brought home a guest. How unexpected." "This guest," Casimir said, still in that deadly soft voice, "has made some very interesting accusations. Accusations about a vampire who killed his family 2 months ago in a small village to the south. A vampire named Christoph Valentine." The courtyard went silent. Every vampire, every servant stopped what they were doing and turned to watch. Kristoff's smile finally faded. "I see," he said. "And you believe the word of a human hunter over your own lieutenant?" "I believe evidence," Casimir replied. "And the fact that you chose tonight, of all nights, to destroy my library suggests you had something to hide there. Documents, perhaps. Records of your movements." He took a step forward. "Tell me, old friend, how long have you been planning this?" Kristoff laughed, a sound without humor. "Planning? Casimir, you always were too suspicious for your own good. Yes, I killed the hunter's family. Yes, I did it deliberately, in defiance of your precious rules. Do you want to know why?" His voice rose, and around them other vampires began to emerge from the shadows, drawn by the confrontation. "Because I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be something less than we are. We're apex predators, and you've turned us into sheep, afraid of our own prey." "I've kept us alive," Casimir shot back. "I've kept us safe. You've kept us weak." Kristoff gestured at the gathered court. "Look at them. Look at what you've made them. Vampires who ask permission to hunt, who follow human laws, who cower in the shadows like vermin. We should rule this world, not hiding from it." "And how many of them agree with you?" Casimir asked quietly. "How many of my court have you turned against me?" The question hung in the air. Alara watched as the other vampires exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others calculating. She realized with growing dread that this had been brewing for longer than tonight, that Kristoff had been laying groundwork for this confrontation. "Enough," Kristoff said finally. "More than enough. Your time is over, Casimir. You're weak. I can sense it, and so can they. Whatever happened to you tonight, it broke something fundamental. Your power is a fraction of what it was. And without that power, you're just another vampire, one who can be replaced." Casimir was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone present. He laughed. "You're absolutely right," he said. "My power is diminished. The binding that held my most valuable servant has been broken. I'm vulnerable in ways I haven't been in centuries." He looked around at the assembled court. "So here's what's going to happen. Anyone who wants to challenge me, now is the time. Step forward and we'll settle this in the old way. Trial by combat." No one moved. "No takers." Casimir's smile was sharp. "How disappointing. Perhaps you're not as weak as you thought you'd made me." He turned back to Kristoff. "But you, my old friend, you've committed crimes that cannot be overlooked. You've broken our laws, endangered our safety, and destroyed my property. So I'll give you a choice. Face trial before the court, or face me now." Kristoff's hand moved to the sword at his side. "You think you can take me in your weakened state?" "I think," Casimir said softly, "that I've survived 8 centuries because I'm smarter than you. Stronger, too, as it happens, even weakened. But we'll find out, won't we?" The duel was brief and brutal. Kristoff was fast and skilled, but Casimir had centuries of experience and a cold, calculating precision that turned every one of Kristoff's attacks against him. Within minutes, Kristoff was disarmed and on his knees, Casimir's blade at his throat. "Any last words?" Casimir asked. Kristoff looked up at him, blood trickling from his mouth. "This isn't over. Others believe as I do. You can't kill all of us." "No," Casimir agreed, "but I can make an example of you." He looked up at the assembled court. Let this be a lesson to anyone else who thinks chaos is preferable to order. We survive because we're careful, because we follow rules that keep us hidden, keep us safe. Break those rules, and this is the consequence. He brought the blade down, and Kristoff's head rolled across the cobblestones. His body crumbled to ash almost immediately, the way ancient vampires did when their unlife finally ended. Casimir cleaned his blade on his cloak and sheathed it. "Dispose of the remains," he ordered. "And someone put out that damned fire before the entire castle burns down." He turned to Ilara. "With me." She followed him inside, leaving Thomas under the guard of 2 servants, with instructions to give him food and a room. The hunter had watched the entire duel in silence, his expression unreadable. Casimir led her to his private study, a room she had never been allowed to enter before. It was lined with books and scrolls, maps and artifacts from across centuries. He poured himself a glass of dark liquid from a crystal decanter. Blood, she realized, though from what source she didn't want to know, and drank it slowly. "Well," he said finally, "that was an interesting evening." Ilara stood near the door, still processing everything that had happened. In the span of a single night, she had broken a blood binding, formed an alliance with her former master, tracked a hunter through the forest, and witnessed an execution. She felt wrung out, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. "The library," she said. "How much was destroyed?" "Most of the restricted section." Casimir's jaw tightened. Kristoff chose his target well. Those books were irreplaceable. Centuries of accumulated knowledge about magic and binding, about power and its limitations. He paused. "Including, I suspect, information about how to break a blood binding." Ilara's head snapped up. "You think that's why he burned it? Because he knew I'd want access to it?" "I think," Casimir said slowly, "that Kristoff was more observant than I gave him credit for. He must have sensed the change in our binding, must have realized that you represented a threat to his plans. If you had access to those books, you might have found a way to strengthen yourself, to become powerful enough to challenge any vampire who tried to seize control." He smiled slightly. Kristoff was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He removed the threat. "So what now?" Ilara asked. "I helped you, like we agreed, but the books are gone." "The books are gone," Casimir acknowledged, "but not the knowledge. I've read everything in that library, Ilara, multiple times, over the centuries. I may not have it all memorized word for word, but I can reconstruct the essential information." He set down his glass and looked at her directly. "The question is, do you still want it? After tonight, after seeing what vampire politics really looks like, do you still want to learn magic that could make you a target?" Ilara thought about it. She thought about the feeling of her magic flowing freely, unconstrained by the binding, when she had healed Thomas. She thought about the 300 years she had spent as property, powerless and voiceless. And she thought about the look on Kristoff's face when Casimir had executed him, the shock of someone who had underestimated his opponent. "Yes," she said firmly, "I want to learn, because the only thing more dangerous than being powerful is being weak in a world full of predators." Casimir nodded slowly. "Then we have a bargain. I'll teach you everything I know about magic and binding, about power and how to wield it. In exchange, you'll stay here at Ravenmoor, and you'll help me rebuild what Kristoff destroyed." He paused. "Not as a servant, as an apprentice, possibly even as an ally." "And the blood binding? Can it be restored? Do you want it to be?" The question hung between them. Ilara realized that this was the real test, the real bargain. Casimir could probably restore the binding if he chose to. could force her back into servitude, but he was offering her a choice instead. "No," she said, "I don't want to be bound again, but I'm willing to stay voluntarily to learn from you, as long as you treat me as a person rather than property." "Acceptable." Casimir extended his hand again, as he had in the Great Hall earlier, but this time when Elara took it, the gesture felt like something more than a simple bargain. It felt like the beginning of something unprecedented, a partnership between vampire and witch, predator and prey, master and former slave. Something that would change both of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The days that followed were strange and transformative. Elara moved out of the servants' quarters and into proper rooms in the West Wing, with a bed that was actually comfortable and a window that overlooked the forest. She spent her mornings with Casimir, learning to harness her magic in ways she had never imagined possible. The healing gift she had always possessed turned out to be just one facet of a much broader power. She could sense life force, could manipulate the energy that flowed through living things, could even, with practice, drain that energy or redirect it. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. In the afternoons, she explored the remains of the library, salvaging what books had survived and helping Casimir reconstruct his records. And in the evenings, she often found herself in conversation with Thomas, who had chosen to remain at the castle rather than return to his empty village. "You're staying?" she asked him one night as they sat in the small garden courtyard. It was one of the few places in the castle that felt peaceful, with night-blooming flowers and a fountain that sang softly in the darkness. "Where else would I go?" Thomas replied. His wound had healed completely, leaving only a faint silver scar. "My family is dead. My home is gone. At least here I can—" He trailed off, staring at his hands. "At least here I can make sure what happened to them doesn't happen to anyone else." "You want to hunt vampires?" "I want to hunt the ones who deserve it, the ones like Kristoff who kill for sport and pleasure." He looked at her. "Your master?" "He's not my master," Elara interrupted, "not anymore." "Your ally, then?" Thomas smiled slightly. "He's offering me a position, an enforcer, he called it. Someone who can move through the human world, who can identify rogue vampires and bring them to justice before they create the kind of chaos that leads to purges." Elara considered that. It made a certain kind of sense. Casimir had always been strategic, always thinking several moves ahead. Having a human hunter on his payroll would give him access to information and networks he couldn't reach himself. "And you trust him?" "No," Thomas said honestly. "But I respect him. He killed the monster who murdered my family. That counts for something." He paused. "And he's not like Kristoff. He follows rules, has standards. That also counts for something in this world." Over the following weeks, a strange household began to take shape at Ravenmoor Castle. Casimir's court, shaken by Kristoff's betrayal and execution, became more cautious, more disciplined. The vampires who had entertained notions of rebellion quietly abandoned them, seeing that Casimir's apparent weakness had been vastly overstated. Thomas began his training as an enforcer, learning to track and identify supernatural threats while maintaining his humanity. And Elara discovered talents she had never known she possessed. "The binding didn't just restrain you," Casimir told her one morning as they practiced in the castle's training room. "It actively suppressed your power, channeling it into a reservoir I could draw from when needed. That's why healing Thomas broke it. You finally pushed back hard enough to rupture the connection." "So all this time, you were essentially feeding off my magic?" "In a sense," Casimir had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Blood bindings are parasitic by nature. I won't pretend otherwise. But now that you're free of it, your power is growing exponentially. In another few months, you might actually be strong enough to challenge me." Elara laughed at the thought. Then she saw his expression and realized he was serious. "You're afraid of me," she said wonderingly. "I'm cautious around you," Casimir corrected. "There's a difference. Fear implies irrationality, and there's nothing irrational about respecting a potential threat." He demonstrated a complex pattern of energy manipulation, his hands weaving light into temporary shapes. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. The strongest alliances are built on mutual respect and mutual caution. If you're powerful enough to challenge me, then you're also powerful enough to be a genuine partner. Is that what we are? Partners? Casimir was silent for a moment, considering. "I'm not sure what we are," he admitted finally. "We've moved past master and servant, certainly. Allies, definitely. But there's something else here, something I don't quite have words for." He looked at her with an expression that was almost vulnerable. "In 800 years, I've never met anyone who could break my bindings and then choose to stay. Most would have run the moment they were free." "Maybe I'm just practical," Ilara said lightly, though her heart was beating faster. "Where else would I find a teacher who knows as much about magic as you do?" "Maybe." But Casimir's eyes suggested he didn't quite believe that was the only reason. The truth was, Ilara herself wasn't entirely sure why she had stayed. In the beginning, it had been purely strategic. She had nowhere to go, no resources, and Casimir offered her knowledge in exchange for her help. But as the weeks passed, something had shifted. She found herself looking forward to their morning lessons, to the rare moments when Casimir would smile at a particularly clever application of magic she had devised. She found herself noticing small details about him, the way he rubbed his temple when he was tired, the slight softening of his expression when he thought no one was watching. It was dangerous, this growing fascination. Casimir was still a vampire, still a creature who had lived for centuries and would continue living long after she was dust. He had enslaved her, kept her captive for 300 years. She should hate him. But hatred required a kind of simplicity she no longer felt. One evening, about 2 months after Kristoff's execution, Ilara found herself unable to sleep. She wandered the castle halls, eventually ending up in the reconstructed library. The fire damage had been repaired, though many of the books were lost forever. Casimir had been painstakingly writing new volumes, recording everything he could remember from the destroyed texts. She found him there now, bent over a desk, writing by candlelight, even though his vampire eyes could see perfectly well in darkness. He looked up as she entered. "Restless?" he asked. "Thinking," she corrected, settling into a chair across from him. "About power, about what it means to have it. And what conclusions have you reached? That it's not enough on its own." Ilara picked up one of the quills on his desk, turning it over in her fingers. Kristoff had power. He was strong, fast, centuries old. But he was reckless with it, used it to satisfy his own impulses without thinking about consequences. That's what got him killed. True. Casimir set down his own quill. Power without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. But wisdom without power is equally useless. You can see what needs to be done, but lack the means to do it. So you need both. You need both, Casimir agreed. But you also need something else. Something Kristoff never understood. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. You need to understand that power is not just about domination. It's about responsibility. Every creature I bind, every vampire I allow into my territory, every decision I make about who lives and who dies, all of it carries weight. Kristoff thought ruling meant doing whatever he wanted. He never grasped that true power lies in restraint. Ilara studied him in the candlelight. "Is that why you let me go, when you could have forced the binding back into place?" "Partly." Casimir's gaze met hers. "But also because I realized something when the binding broke. For 300 years, I had been using you as a tool, and in doing so, I had wasted your potential. You could have been so much more than a servant who healed on command. You could have been, he trailed off. Could have been what? An equal. The words seemed to cost him something to say. Someone who chose to stand beside me rather than being forced to kneel before me. And I think, perhaps, that would have been more valuable than any binding. The air between them felt charged, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Elara knew she should be careful, should maintain the professional distance of teacher and student, ally and ally. But something in her rebelled against that caution. "Casimir," she said softly, "when you look at me now, what do you see?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I see someone who forgave me when she had no reason to. Someone who chose mercy over vengeance, even after 3 centuries of captivity. Someone who is becoming more powerful by the day, and who uses that power with more wisdom than vampires twice her age." He stood, moving around the desk until he was standing in front of her chair. "I see someone I don't deserve, but who I'm selfish enough to want anyway." Ilara's breath caught. She rose slowly, until they were standing face to face. "I'm not sure I've forgiven you," she said honestly. "I'm not sure I ever can, completely. What you did to me, keeping me bound for 300 years, that's not something that can be easily erased. I know. But I also know that people, even vampires, can change, can grow." She reached up, hesitating for just a moment before placing her palm against his chest. His skin was cool through the fabric of his shirt, and she couldn't feel a heartbeat, but she could sense the power that thrummed through him, the ancient life force that sustained him. "I see someone who is trying to be better than what he was, and that matters." Casimir's hand came up to cover hers. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "In 800 years, I've never. This is new territory for me." "For me too," Ilara smiled slightly. "I've been dead to the world for 3 centuries. As far as starting over goes, we're both beginners." "Then perhaps," Casimir said, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand, "we can figure it out together." The kiss, when it came, was tentative and strange, and somehow perfect. It tasted of possibility and danger, of old wounds and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, Ilara was trembling, and even Casimir's legendary composure seemed shaken. "This is complicated," he said. "Everything about us is complicated." "Fair point." Casimir smiled, and it was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way she had rarely seen. "But I think, perhaps, that's what makes it interesting." They didn't rush into anything. The relationship that developed between them over the following months was cautious, built on incremental trust and careful honesty. They continued their lessons, though now they were truly teaching each other. Casimir sharing his centuries of knowledge about magic and power. Ilara helping him remember what it meant to see the world through newer eyes. Thomas became a fixture in their strange household, his hunting expeditions bringing back information about rogue vampires across the territory. He and Ilara developed an easy friendship, and he seemed to accept her evolving relationship with Casimir with pragmatic good humor. "As long as he treats you well," Thomas told her one day, "I won't stake him in a sleep. But the moment he goes back to the way things were—" "He won't," Ilara said with confidence. "He's changed. We both have." And it was true. The castle itself seemed different now, less of a prison and more of a sanctuary. The vampires of Casimir's court, seeing the transformation in their lord, became less rigid, more willing to engage with the human world in constructive ways. Casimir established new protocols for hunting, stricter rules about avoiding detection, and harsh penalties for those who broke them. But there were still challenges. One night, about 6 months after the night everything changed, a messenger arrived from the council, the gathering of old vampires who maintained order across the broader supernatural world. They had heard about Kristoff's execution, about the broken blood binding, about the witch who now stood as Casimir's equal rather than his servant, and they wanted to investigate. "This could be a problem," Casimir said, reading the formal summons. They were in his study, Ilara sitting in what had become her usual chair by the fire. "The council is conservative, traditional. They won't approve of our arrangement." "What can they do?" Ilara asked, though a thread of worry ran through her. "Declare me unfit to rule, strip me of my territory. Or," Casimir's jaw tightened, "demand that I restore the binding to prove I haven't been compromised. And if you refuse, then we'll have a war on our hands." He set down the letter, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture of frustration she recognized. "The council has enough power to destroy us if they choose to, and they have no tolerance for anything that threatens the status quo." Ilara stood and moved to his side, taking his hand. Over the past months, such gestures of casual intimacy had become natural between them. "Then we convince them we're not a threat. We show them that our arrangement makes you stronger, not weaker." "It does make me stronger," Casimir said quietly. "Having you as a true partner rather than a bound servant has made me more effective, more connected to the world beyond my castle walls. But the council won't see it that way. They'll see it as weakness, as sentiment overruling strategic thinking." "Then they're fools," Ilara squeezed his hand, "and we'll prove it to them." The council arrived 3 weeks later, 5 ancient vampires, each representing a different region and lineage. They were led by Lady Morgana, a vampire so old that even Casimir treated her with deference. She had ice-white hair and eyes like frozen silver, and when she looked at Ilara, it was with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock. The tribunal was held in the Great Hall, with Casimir's entire court assembled to witness. Thomas stood near the back, his hand resting casually near his weapons. Ilara stood beside Casimir's chair, not behind it like a servant, but beside it like an equal. "Lord Casimir," Lady Morgana began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, "we have received concerning reports about the state of your territory, specifically regarding the witch you once held under blood binding." "Ilara is no longer bound," Casimir said calmly. "The binding broke 6 months ago, and I chose not to restore it." "Chose not to restore it?" Another council member, Lord Victor, repeated with disdain. "As if it were a matter of choice rather than necessity. Blood bindings exist for a reason, Casimir. They keep dangerous elements under control." "Ilara was never a dangerous element," Casimir replied. "She was a powerful witch I chose to enslave rather than ally with. That was my mistake, and I've corrected it." "By allowing her to roam free?" Morgana's eyebrow arched. "By giving her access to your library, your knowledge, your power? What's to stop her from using everything you've taught her against you?" "The same thing that stops any ally from betraying another," Ilara said, speaking for the first time. The council members turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of their ancient gazes. Trust, mutual benefit, respect. Novel concepts, perhaps, but effective ones. "The witch speaks?" Lord Victor said mockingly. "How charming! Tell me, girl, how long do you think this arrangement will last? A year? 10? What happens when you and die, as all mortals do, and Lord Casimir moves on to the next pretty young thing who catches his eye? Ilara felt her magic rise, responding to the insult, but she forced it down. Losing her temper here would only prove the council right. "What happens in 100 years is between Casimir and me," she said evenly.
But right now, in the present, our partnership has made this territory more stable and secure than it's been in centuries. We've eliminated rogues, established better protocols for hunting, and created a network of human allies who help us maintain secrecy. All things that benefit the broader vampire community." "She's right," Casimir added. "Since Ilara and I began working together as equals, we've had 0 incidents that risked exposure, 0 rogue attacks on human settlements, 0 conflicts with hunters. Can any other territory in the Council's jurisdiction claim the same?" Silence. The council members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the accuracy of that statement. Finally, Morgana spoke again. "Your results are admirable, Lord Casimir, but precedent matters. If we allow you to maintain this arrangement, other vampires will seek to emulate it. Blood bindings will be seen as optional rather than necessary. The structure that has kept our kind safe for millennia will begin to crumble." "Or," Ilara said, "a new structure will emerge, one based on cooperation rather than coercion, one that's actually sustainable in the modern world, where information travels fast and humans are harder to manipulate than they once were." "You speak of change as though it's inherently good," Lord Victor said coldly. "But change is what gets our kind killed. Change is what leads to exposure, to panic, to stakes and sunlight and extinction." "Change is what keeps us relevant," Casimir countered. "The world is transforming whether we like it or not. We can adapt, or we can cling to old ways and watch ourselves become obsolete." He stood, and suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop. When he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of his 800 years. "I have survived this long because I understand when to hold firm and when to bend. The Council would do well to remember that rigidity leads to breaking." Morgana studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. A cold expression, but genuine. "Well said, Lord Casimir. Very well said." She looked at the other council members. "I propose we allow this experiment to continue. For now. We will revisit the situation in 1 year's time. If Lord Casimir's territory remains stable and secure, we will consider officially recognizing his partnership with the witch. If not," she let the threat hang unfinished. "Acceptable," Casimir said, though Ilara could sense his relief. The council departed the next morning, leaving behind a sense of reprieve rather than resolution. But a reprieve was enough. "We have a year," Ilara said, watching the council's carriages disappear down the forest road. "A year to prove this works." "Well, prove it," Casimir said, his arms sliding around her waist. "And then we'll have a lifetime to build on it." "You'll have a lifetime," Ilara corrected gently. "I'll have a human span, nothing more." Casimir was quiet for a moment. Then, "There are ways to extend a human life. Magical means. Not vampirism, not that kind of transformation. But there are options, if you wanted them." Ilara looked up at him, surprised. "You'd want that? For me to stay?" "I want," Casimir said carefully, "for you to have the choice. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. But yes, if you're asking whether I hope you'll choose to stay, then yes. Selfishly, desperately, yes." It was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever said to her. Ilara turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Ask me again in a year," she said, "when we've proven to the council that this works. When we know for certain this isn't just a temporary alliance, ask me then, and I'll give you my answer. A year, Casimir agreed, and kissed her with a tenderness that would have seemed impossible when they first met. The months that followed were busy ones.
Ilara threw herself into mastering the magic Casimir taught her, developing new applications and combinations of power that surprised even her teacher. Thomas expanded his network of informants, creating a sophisticated early warning system for supernatural threats. And Casimir, perhaps for the first time in centuries, seemed content, not just satisfied with his territory and power, but genuinely happy. There were still challenges, of course. A few vampires in the court remained skeptical of Ilara's position, and there were occasional incidents with rogues from other territories who didn't respect the new protocols. But each challenge was met and overcome, and the territory grew stronger for it. One evening, as winter settled over the forest and snow began to blanket the castle grounds, Ilara stood in the restored library, looking at the shelves of new books Casimir had written. Each volume represented hours of painstaking work, centuries of knowledge carefully recorded for future generations. "You've been staring at those books for 20 minutes, Casimir said from the doorway. "Thinking about something specific?" "About legacy," Ilara said. "About what we leave behind when we're gone. You've lived 800 years, Casimir. You've seen empires rise and fall, watched the world transform in ways no human can imagine. What do you want your legacy to be?" Casimir moved to stand beside her, his eyes scanning the books. "I used to think it would be power, territory, control. But lately," he paused, "lately I think it might be this. The knowledge in these books, the protocols we've established, the idea that vampires and humans can work together as equals rather than predator and prey. If that survives beyond me, if that becomes the norm rather than the exception, that would be a legacy worth having. And if I choose to extend my life, if I stay with you, not just for a human lifetime, but for centuries, would that change things?" "Everything and nothing," Casimir said. He turned to face her fully. "It would mean more time together, more opportunities to build on what we've started. But the fundamental truth wouldn't change. I want you to be happy. I want you to be free. And I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'll love you the same." It was the first time he had used that word, love. It hung between them, profound and transformative. "I love you too," Ilara said, and felt the truth of it resonate through her entire being. "And I think I want to stay. Not just for a year or 10 years. I want to see what we can build together, given time." Casimir's smile was like sunrise breaking over mountains. "Then we'll build something extraordinary." The year passed more quickly than Ilara expected. When the council returned for their follow-up assessment, they found a territory that was thriving, secure, prosperous, and peaceful. The protocols Casimir and Ilara had established were being adopted by other territories, and the vampire community as a whole was adapting to the changing world in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. Lady Morgana's final verdict was delivered in the same great hall where the first tribunal had been held. The council acknowledges that Lord Casimir's experiment has been successful. We officially recognize the partnership between Lord Casimir and the witch Ilara, and we encourage other territories to study their model. It was as close to an apology as the ancient vampires were likely to give. That night, Casimir and Ilara celebrated with their household, a strange gathering of vampires, humans, and one particularly skilled witch who had somehow become the heart of it all. Thomas raised a toast to unlikely alliances and even unlikelier friendships. The vampires of the court, who had once looked at Ilara with suspicion, now regarded her with respect and even admiration.
Later, when the celebration had wound down and the castle had grown quiet, Casimir led Ilara to the roof. It was a clear night. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Below them, the forest stretched out in all directions, dark and wild and beautiful. "I have something for you," Casimir said. He held out a small wooden box, worn smooth with age. Ilara opened it carefully. Inside was a ring, simple silver, set with a stone that seemed to capture the light of the stars. But she could sense the magic in it, old and powerful and carefully woven. "It's a binding," Casimir said, "but not like the one I forced on you before. This one only works if both parties agree. If we both choose, freely and willingly, to link our lives together. It won't compel obedience or give either of us power over the other. But it will let us share energy, strength, life force. It will let you live as long as I do, if that's what you want." Ilara looked from the ring to his face. "And if I say no? Then we continue as we are, and I count myself fortunate for whatever time we have." Casimir took her hand gently. "This is a choice, Ilara, a real one, not made under duress or out of necessity. Just a choice." Ilara thought about the girl she had been 300 years ago, the hedge witch who had lived peacefully at the edge of the forest, content with her simple life. That girl would never have imagined standing here, on the roof of a vampire's castle, being offered immortality and partnership and love. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She had been transformed by suffering and survival, by mercy and magic, by the strange alchemy that turned a slave and her master into something far more complex and beautiful. "Yes," she said, "I choose yes." Casimir slipped the ring onto her finger, and Ilara felt the magic activate, a warmth that spread through her entire body, connecting her to him in ways that were profound but not binding. She could sense his presence now, not as a chain, but as a constant, comforting awareness, and she knew he could sense hers the same way. "Partners," Casimir said. "Partners," Ilara agreed, "in everything." They stood together on the roof, watching the stars wheel overhead, two unlikely souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to create light. Below them, the castle slept peacefully. Around them, the forest whispered its ancient secrets. And ahead of them stretched centuries of possibility, of growth, of building something new from the ruins of what had been. It wasn't the ending Ilara would have imagined for herself all those years ago, but it was, she thought, exactly the beginning she had always needed.